Perfect. So I want to open the floor to the current Bonners. If a few of y'all would want to share your opinions on this, would you say that housing is a right? Yes or no? Why or why not? And kind of just to start our creative juices flowing. I'm probably gonna have to call on somebody.
And I might just add to that, is housing a civil rights issue? Is it a human right, a civil right? What is, how is it tied to the right to be safe and secure and happy in this country, both in this country and around the world? Is housing a right other places and not here, or here and not other places?
Okay, I might have to call somebody who I know through FIT.
Okay, I'll answer.
Oh, sorry. Okay, continue. Who's talking?
This is Lauren. So I'm actually in a human rights class right now, and under the UN and the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, housing is considered a human right. It is something everyone is entitled to, but the United States does not recognize all of the human rights, and it's not something that they enforce or supply like other countries do. So human rights are a very debatable thing. I think housing should be a right, and it should be supplemented if people cannot provide it themselves. But how that actually plays out here in America and in different places is debatable.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to say something just with our interactions before. That was a really good take. And that's so cool you were able to relate that to your class. Thanks for that. I want to call a couple more people. Neha, as a current FIT member who I've worked with multiple times at Reed, you able to answer the question? Maybe it's not working. Jane?
I know Jane has an opinion on this. Jane, what do you think?
Yeah, so I guess just to piggyback off of what Lauren says, like my immediate response is like, of course it's a right. I mean, it's like that lowest level of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like everyone should have it. Like everyone should, have a meal, and everyone should have a roof over their heads. But I mean, I didn't know that it was part of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. It certainly makes sense that it is, but it's definitely not, from my experience, part of like our conversation in America. Like just among the general population, it's like this type of niche thing, if that makes sense. I don't know how much sense that made.
Definitely. That made sense, Jane. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. One more.
I agree with Jane. If you don't mind if I pitch in here.
Of course.
Here, I'll start my video. So I don't think about this topic very often, so I did just look up like for and against arguments, and one of them was the what Lauren mentioned, how it is in effect a human right. But I was reading on here, and then they talked about the Fair Housing Act on here, but that is something we don't talk about very often in America, is housing. We talk about a lot of other issues that don't apply to as many people as housing does. I mean, housing affects everybody, and especially lower income. And well, obviously in most of our heads, we think, housing is great and we think it should be right. It's not. It's just because of the economy we live in and the society we live in, where it's not a guaranteed right, though there are things in place such as price floors and all sorts of stuff to try and get housing to everybody, although it doesn't really work all the time.
No, yeah, definitely. Thanks, Isaac. And I think you said something important. Well, thanks for everybody who contributed, because we don't think about it exactly. And if you actually think about it, we do recognize that housing is such an intersectional topic to all these different areas that are important, and unfortunate that as a society we don't really talk about it that much and how it affects all these areas, which leads us to Deborah.
Yeah. So as you guys are Bonners, I'm sure that you have heard or talked about how your zip code matters and where you live affects your access to everything, your social determinants of health. So when people don't have housing, like Jane mentioned earlier, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're not getting their basic needs met. So they're also missing out on getting nutritious food and being physically healthy, being able to go to the doctor and get routine checkups, and also go to the doctor even when something is wrong with them. When people are homeless, they don't have insurance. Healthcare is very, very expensive in America. And when people don't have a place to live and aren't making money, they are falling through the cracks in all of these areas. Okay, I don't know if everyone can see the chat, but Jane just said being homeless is also super traumatic, and she's right. It has negative physiological and psychological effects on people who don't have a house because, like I said, they are missing out on just those very basic needs of safety and just like being able to eat and know where your next meal is coming from and if you'll have water. In addition, education, when people don't have a place to live, they are just worried about where they're going to sleep. So they don't have like the access and the opportunity to get through school, or they don't have access to schools that can really support them to, you know, succeed at like standardized tests and SATs, just because the schools don't have enough funding to really take care of all of the students the way they need, especially when they're also students who have learning disabilities or just are neurodivergent, things like that. And next. And so in Bonner, obviously, we try to address these effects of, you know, the zip code for low-income neighborhoods. In Cultivate, we plant community gardens. We have the orchard to give one healthy produce to residents of New Hope. And in addition, it's a great community builder to have. The food insecurity team is doing fantastic work with food pantries and the food bank, with providing food, providing meals, providing goods to families and individuals who are struggling and otherwise would not have had food to eat that evening or that week. And previously, Campus Kitchen did a similar thing in addition to alleviating food waste with their partnership with Airmark and Chartwell's, recovering food from the dining halls and taking it to New Hope residents, providing them weekly meals, which is just so great for people who previously didn't know where their meals were going to come from. And we also have really great education initiatives with the SAT prep program, supporting high school students in doing SAT prep. Sorry, because without these programs, they wouldn't have access to coaching and assistance that is really necessary to know how to test well, because SATs and things aren't about being smart. It's about understanding how to take the tests. And those aren't things that they just build into the curriculum. So we also have WISE, which supports our middle school students in writing, because literacy is very, very important and is a huge determinant of, future success, at least in this society. And we also have our SMART program with the science for the fifth graders, engaging them in those topics that they don't really get to explore in the classroom. We already kind of touched on this, but it's really, really important to understand. Anyone who's taken, Psych 101 has probably seen or heard of this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you read the pyramid from the bottom up, meaning at the very basic level, what every human being requires are these physiological needs of air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. Basically, meaning you need to be able to eat, have some place to sleep, have running water that you can drink and bathe in. And that's at the basic level what you need to be able to survive. When you're homeless, you really don't have any of these things as a guarantee. So that kind of really plays into like what Jane mentioned earlier, how homelessness can be incredibly traumatic and it's just not a great experience for anybody to have. And that's why we have these shelters and these affordable housing programs to try to address these issues so that nobody has to experience homelessness.
Yes. Because the reason why we're talking, in Bonner, we kind of address, and going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we do address more of the upper levels. And so in this presentation, we were very kind of going down to the root of it. If you're homeless, it kind of predetermines everything else. If you can't get those basic needs, you can't get it. So when we talk about homelessness, I know right off the bat, people think people living on the streets and people that you live under the bridge and things like that. But there are many types of different kinds of homelessness. People that are like couch surfing, people that live in their cars. But the type of homelessness we don't really get to see. And for as a society, we've created ways to address that, and there are different organizations to kind of address the immediate needs of homeless people. If you're fleeing domestic violence, if you got evicted from your landlord, and you need somewhere to go, then there are all these opportunities to kind of give you that emergency shelters to kind of give you a roof over your head. And more often than not, these times are kind of limited. You kind of have X amount of days before for you to live in these areas, and there's like sometimes stipulations, but the main premise of this is that you deserve to be housed, and you deserve to have access to clean water, to water and food, and these areas kind of provide you with that. And and another type of homelessness, and the solution to that would kind of be affordable housing, and this is kind of really kind of going into the root of our presentation, because as it says there, according to HUD, affordable housing is generally defined as housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% hours of gross income for housing costs, including utilities. And that is important because when you look at homelessness, and in order for them to reach the next level, either you are completely devoid of any income, of any resources, or you do have some, but it only can pay for your gas money, or it can only pay for your food. And just still within the umbrella term of homelessness, because you don't have a roof over your head, or you live in kind of an uncomfortable situation because you're living with your family, or with your mom, or I guess you said like couch surfing. So this would be an easy solution for those that aren't necessarily in need of a shelter, because they do have some sort of income. Maybe they're getting social security benefits, but they need something more sustainable. And this is where affordable housing fits in. So if we look at a solution to kind of address both, right, of the situation of people that are kind of on the streets, so there's zero income, they don't have, health insurance, and they're about to be perhaps kicked out of a shelter because they're kind of reaching their capacity, or for people that are still within the umbrella term but want to have something more sustainable. New Hope Housing, and this is where we fit in, because we do approach more of the housing first approach, where it's important for us to get these people with with a roof over their head, kind of give them those basic necessities, regardless of if it's an emergency shelter, if it's affordable housing. We kind of merge the two concepts and how we address Houston's most vulnerable population and kind of the mission of serving this group. And we do it in multiple ways, because when we talk about shelters, they're kind of more immediate, right? They kind of just address the kind of right on the street and only a certain amount of days. When we talk about affordable housing, people kind of have to pay out of their pocket. That's when you think about Section 8 vouchers, things like that. But I think the reason why I love working for New Hope Housing, and the reason what I've learned over the years, Deborah and I have been learning with conversations with Sarah, conversations with district managers, talking about how this all operates, is just to know how, this nonprofit, this company has multiple levels and multiple parts to it. And they all serve those different types of homelessness that I talked about earlier on. So if you want to live in New Hope Housing, what do you have to do? How does it look like? What's the process? Because it's very intimidating. Deborah and I get calls all the time, and these people are like, oh my, hello, I, need to live somewhere. I'm living in my car. How do I get immediate shelter? And that's kind of the previous types of solutions to homelessness that maybe our society kind of conceives to be. But we're kind of different, because we serve people to a certain extent might need to pay for themselves, or at least a section of it, that we would consider as a self-pay resident. So you can apply to live there through this method. So these people, kind of this population, generally have a limited income. They're on Social Security, disability benefits, they're on pensions. They perhaps work a job, but they're kind of low paying. They're just enough to kind of scrape by. They can't really pay for, rent to house their, 3 or 4 children. To a certain extent, maybe they have some condition that kind of prevents them from making more. And so New Hope Housing would kind of cater those people because of our rent and how it's affordable to these types of people. It can help them in kind of that other area of homelessness. They also have unstable housing, as we've talked about. They could be couch surfing. Maybe they're in a domestic violence situation and they want to leave in a month, so they have to secretly go away and apply to live there. Because they still have some income and things like that. We also have people that are part of, the Section 8 voucher, where the government kind of pays for a certain part of their housing, and they also qualify to live here at New Hope Housing. And these populations generally have some sort of income, but again, they're still under the term of homelessness, because homelessness is definitely defined by not having consistent house or consistent home, with all these interwoven factors and things that all intersect with one another. And New Hope Housing does of course, a first housing approach, but we also want to serve different types of housing precariousness. And so this is where people kind of think of like the homeless population, kind of the easiest conception of it. And these are the people that, and with this approach, so another reason why we kind of work together with other partner organizations, that are typically shelters that we've talked about earlier on, such as Star of Hope, Avenue to 60, Search, Harmony House, CPS, because these organizations have the firsthand experience of working with people on the ground, that oftentimes, they have events throughout the year where they, go under the bridges and, meet these people that have a history of, substance abuse and things like that. And we partner up with them because they know things that we don't know. And it's important to address all these different areas in order to unilaterally address this issue that, as we all talked about, is so complicated. And there are different, because of a society, we don't really think about it or have some pre-existing structures to guarantee such things to people. It requires such a complicated solution. So we partner up with them to kind of get our residents. So the first part that I've talked about were residents that, can drive, that have a car, that kind of, again, has unstable housing. These people don't even have housing at all. And, they're living in their car, living on the streets. And these people are typically high need. So these partner organizations find individuals that are high need, and they kind of qualify high need by something called a housing assessment that in Houston, we have a lot of efforts to kind of fund and to really emphasize this type of approach for this kind of population, where they assess, your income, your history, your health conditions, your income and things like that. And they kind of give you a score. And this process was actually what I learned more through this job and through working in New Hope Housing, is that there is a structure in place to address these types of people in order for them to go through this port of entry and assess their background, and then they can be put into a database that all these partner organizations can reach out to them, and if they are a part of their requirements and their stipulations, for them to eventually reach New Hope Housing. So you kind of see how it's like very layered, and there's the multiple parts to it, and it is daunting to anybody that is just kicked out of their parents' house for being LGBTQ, or someone who's fleeing domestic violence. Is like, what is next? And there are so many levels to this. So it's important for us to kind of understand it, at least within Houston, or kind of at least within our own community. And of course, for these residents, how are you supposed to pay? Because at the end of the day, housing, there's always that component to it. And there are programs in place, something such as called a project-based voucher. I'm sure people have talked about vouchers in Section 8, and that is one of the housing and urban development, housing and HUD, basically. I'm trying to think of what the acronym means. They're kind of to incentivize and help people find housing, and there are different types of it. Again, there's so many different types, and it's kind of just having to break down the different ones. And New Hope Housing kind of partners up with these organizations where they get something called a project-based voucher, where these residents can live in our facility, in our properties and other areas, given that they meet the requirements, and so the government or the Houston Housing Authority will pay a certain portion or all of it, because we do recognize that this high need population doesn't have income to pay rent, doesn't have income to do these little things. So they will pay for a portion, if not all of it. So you see how like this approach kind of tries to tackle all these different areas in order to get people off the streets, put them into a program that kind of pays for their housing, provides them with things like case management, provides them with a roof over their head in order for them to go to the next step and to kind of, mobilize themselves and kind of, give them something that is so important and something that is so valuable, such as housing. And this is kind of where Deborah and I come in, and Deborah's going to talk about that.
Hello. Okay. So RG and I both work in property management, like he mentioned earlier. Our office is assistants. I work at New Hope Perry, and RG works at New Hope Sackowitz. And basically, our job, one of the core parts of it is intaking new residents, and like from application to move in, like through the whole process. But people come in from off the streets, people come in from living with their family members and they need to get out, or like RG said, living in their car, all sorts of different levels of homelessness, to try and find something that is long-term and stable. So we do the application process, and it's a very long application with lots of forms because like HUD, affordable housing units, have to have all sorts of like regulations, and everyone has to there's just a lot of regulations and a lot of paperwork. So we do a lot of paperwork, but it's great. So we do the application process. We keep up with the resident or the prospective applicant throughout the application process, letting them know about our availability, the status of their application, the kinds of things that people bring in to apply. Are like generally like social security, disability, unemployment, pension, stuff like that. People do work and live at New Hope, but a lot of the residents that we serve can't work for some reason or other. So that's one of the reasons that they have really struggled previously to find housing. So it's really great to be able to help those people out. In addition to taking in the applications, we do all of their certification paperwork, which is basically certifying that they are at the income level to live in our communities. And we also do like the move-in process and are just awesome front desk receptionists and interact with everyone who comes into the door. One of my favorite things about being an office assistant is you kind of just get to know the residents, and they really, really appreciate that. There are simple things like greeting them by name in the morning that they've like literally told me like makes their day, and like just simple things like helping them out with like a fax, or like telling them a phone number to something. Like, you don't understand the impact of just like having this community has on them, and it's just really, really cool to see. But yeah, we also get to work with resident services a little bit, which we'll talk about a little further in the presentation. But that's where we go kind of beyond the housing and see how else we can help residents address those other portions of the Maslow's hierarchy.
And I just wanted to add also real quick before Sarah's about to talk for her part, but with our job, we kind of foresee the process of, as Deborah said, taking them on the streets or within their homeless or their housing precariousness situations into something, more sustainable and affordable and life stabilized. And it is important with that, with the mission in mind of solving homelessness, that we work through their process and like really going through all that difficult paperwork, because again, it is intimidating, and it's kind of, it puts these people in a position that they're already traumatized, that they go through all these things, and we are there to work with them in order to get a roof over their head, in order to provide them with that shelter and something more sustainable, that than having to do it all by themselves. Because there are people, for example, that has more of a, just an affordable housing where they don't provide this type of service that we do, or kind of have all these different levels into their model and into their structures, because the point is to kind of help them in our type of affordable housing and life stabilizing our properties. it keeps them in mind and kind of works them across from off the streets from the partners, through the application process, and then to finally reaching, New Hope housing. So the next, of course, so after they get a roof over their head, what's next? And kind of this is where Sarah's going to come in and talk about.
Yeah, you guys have been so thorough. I don't know that there's much left for me to say. You really know your stuff for sure. So both of Deborah and RG mentioned the sort of system that we have here in Houston set up to address homelessness. And the goal of that system is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, right? So rare, the fewest people possible experience homelessness in our community. Brief, meaning if someone does end up on the streets, there are nets there, like the shelters, like New Hope Housing, who can scoop them up and get them into housing that meets their level of need. And non-reoccurring, meaning that they don't cycle back into homelessness, that they don't continue to couch surf and bounce around from shelter to shelter. But we actually break that system, that cycle of homelessness. And so once someone gets into housing, once they go through that system and they come to New Hope Housing, that's where my department comes in. And I come alongside the property management team, RG and Deborah and all of their wonderful colleagues. And we tailor services to meet the need of the individual and meet them sort of where they are at the front door, both where they are and also where they want to be. So one of the first things that we do is sit down and make a plan. Make a plan with that resident that includes how we're going to keep them successfully housed, how we're going to stabilize them in housing in the short term, how we're going to begin addressing their needs, their mental health needs, their physical health needs, all of the upper echelon levels of Maslow's hierarchy, how we're going to begin repairing the traumas that they experienced during homelessness and settle them successfully into housing. And then, of course, the long-term housing, which is breaking that cycle and ensuring that they do not return in any way to homelessness. One of the wonderful things about the work that the three of us do, that we all do, is addressing the needs of residents that can be incredibly varied. As both of these guys mentioned, we've got residents who walk in the front door and apply for us, apply with us and qualify based on income is really the only major qualifying criteria, a light background check, but income is how you qualify to live at New Hope Housing. You have to essentially be poor, for lack of a better phrase. And so their needs are things like getting a job, keeping a job, reestablishing connection with family, and sort of settling in and living successfully at New Hope Housing. And then we get all the way to the chronic homeless, that true hard definition of homelessness, meaning you have a physical or mental disability, you've spent years on the streets, that sort of picture of homelessness that we have in our minds, the guys on the street corner, the tents underneath the overpasses, and their needs tend to be much, much higher. And that's where our partners in our programs come in and are able to address things like mental health services, physical health services, keeping folks successfully housed with a high level of care, so that when they do transition out of New Hope, they successfully go somewhere like an assisted living or a nursing facility or something like that. But keep them housed with us as long as they can, so they don't have to go into a nursing home. They can continue to live independently as long as possible. And so we do that with partnerships like Healthcare for the Homeless, important partnership that's federally funded and is able to provide services to our residents. Same thing with Avenue 360, a similar organization. But then, of course, organizations like the YMCA who do after school enrichment, so that we're able to catch the kiddos and get them through school and through college. So that we can sort of help them self-resolve out generational poverty and generational homelessness. And then, of course, things like the food bank, addressing food insecurity, addressing financial education, addressing budgeting needs, and sort of all the things that you might learn sort of in college, to be very frank, to be very realistic. When I was in college, I was an RA, and I think there was at least one more RA in Bonner, I remember. Yes, exactly. And so, you know, when I was an RA, when Deborah was an RA, you know, folks that live in the dorms, when you live in the dorms in college, that is essentially supportive housing, right? You have folks like me and Deborah telling you what to do, and sort of more importantly, telling you what not to do, how to function in society, how to have neighbors and roommates and pick up after yourself, and stay out of trouble to the best of our ability. And sort of, I think that a big part of what I do still, and what this team does, is a little bit of RA. Supportive housing helps folks develop the life skills that we all need to successfully live, both independently and as part of the broader community here in Houston. And so, of course, the most important cornerstone bedrock partner that New Hope Housing can possibly have, that provides the most robust and important services, are the Bonners. And the Bonners provide services that you see right here, that Deborah mentioned earlier, and that these guys can fill in the picture on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to echo what Sarah said, that you know, this community has a wide variety of, you know, needs. And of course, I think the first partnership with New Hope Housing was definitely with the establishment of, you know, Campus Kitchen, and kind of having a community that that are food insecure. And of course, with all it was to supplement, you know, all the stuff that they already get from Houston Food Bank, to get from, you know, senior boxes, to get from Meals on Wheels, and just another part to create our own self-development, but also by impacting and serving the community. And that kind of just started this partnership with, you know, New Hope Housing and with the Bonner Leaders Program. And as you know, I navigate, and as Deborah and I work through this job, it's really important to see how, you know, housing is so intersectional with the mission of ending homelessness, from all these different paths and all these different collaborations. In the same way how we, you know, in Bonner, we look at alleviating poverty, and to see how that intersects with nutrition, education, and health. I think it's important to have this type of mindset in addressing these conditions, because it is never really just a single solution of fixing something. You know, and it involves policies, and for it's like service work that we do, it involves advocacy in order to uplift people from that situation into making more meaningful change, and to having the best life outcomes that they can be. So, you know, it was kind of like a full circle to see, you know, housing, and to see what we do as Bonners, and like to really go delve into like the situation of, you know, if you don't have all of this, then how are you supposed to attain the next level? And then putting them into a house, and finally equipping them with things like, you know, GED classes, and, you know, health screenings, and of course food from Campus Kitchen, or, you know, or with FIT. You know, FIT also operates our food market here at Reed, and kind of creates this bond with these women and children. Or we also have Cultivate, and there's so much room for expansion for Bonner and for this. But of course, the ultimate mission would have to be, you know, alleviating poverty, solving homelessness, and it's kind of just to work within that framework in order to address these situations. But that pretty much wraps up our part. I don't know if there's any questions, or I know Trini had something to say. Go ahead.
I have questions. I have a few questions. as well. I know Jane had one at one point. And then if anybody else says, I'll get us started. I have a few questions. I'll get us started with one.
Okay.
And then let the students chime in, and if maybe I'll have time to ask my other ones. I wanted to ask, so you guys have talked about the different organizations in Houston that you work with in terms of fighting homelessness, the New Hope housing model, and then Sarah mentioned the city of Houston goals related to fighting homelessness. And I'm curious to learn more about how that compares to other cities in Texas, namely Austin and Dallas, which have, especially Dallas, really difficult homelessness issues as well. And maybe how the New Hope model compares to what those cities are doing, or the general city of Houston approach to homelessness.
I think Sarah would definitely be the right person to ask for this.
Sure. Yeah, I can contribute a little bit here. Houston actually has been leading the nation for quite some time in our addressing homelessness. Part of that has to do with the former mayor getting really serious about addressing homelessness. Part of it has to do with us being a very philanthropic city. We have a lot of really great nonprofits in Houston, and we benefit from that tremendously. I think we also are. I think Austin does a great job in addressing homelessness, but they can also be a little bit. Sorry. They can also be a little bit unrealistic when it comes to how they address their homelessness. Sorry, guys. It's the life of a Bonnerary mom. So you know, in the sense that I think one of the special things about New Hope is that we address homelessness in a very business-minded way. Our organization, our company is run like a real business, and I think that that has a huge impact on our ability to continue to grow, to expand, to develop partnerships and keep partnerships that are, you know, first class, high class. That being said, you know, a lot of different cities around the state and the country address homelessness differently. You know, you see a lot of homelessness in the Northeast because they have a lot of social services. They have a lot of very liberal, and I'm not saying liberal in a bad sense, but very open philanthropic sort of programs that encourage folks to move up there because that's where services are. You know, Dallas is different than Houston because, and we have talked to folks about building in Dallas. I think it would be a lovely thing to do, but there's a lot of NIMBYism there. There's a lot of zoning there that we don't have in Houston. Houston just has a really unique both leadership and environment to address homelessness in a real and meaningful way that a lot of other places don't yet have. So that would be my little answer to that. That we've got the political will, which is critical, and we've got organizations like New Hope Housing that address it, and we've got universities like U of H that are the leader in things like service learning. You don't see that other places. All these things are just kind of a confluence to do a meaningful change.
Great, thank you. Do others have questions, students?
Did Jane's question about Section 8 get answered?
I can't quite see it. Can someone
read it? I think Archie touched on it earlier. I was basically just asking like how someone would qualify for Section 8 housing.
So this is where I got a little bit nerdy. It's honestly another reason why I transferred from Sarah's department where I used to work, and I departed having her as my boss into property management because I got really interested in like that concept, Jane. So I'm glad you were able to build it up because all this is funded from a mix of the Houston Housing Authority, and of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Houston Housing Authority and HUD, into kind of having these different programs to let people become, to get housed. So particularly for Section 8, that is called like a housing choice voucher. So in Houston particularly, and from what I've learned, it used to be a sign-up list. So this goes into the whole concept of how certain structures in society kind of disenfranchise and predispose people to having certain outcomes, because you can sign up for the list and you can help, get this voucher and apply to a landlord, apply to the department, and hopefully take that and make them take it. However, it takes years, so because the line is so long, you might need it tomorrow, you might need next month, but you don't know when you're going to get it. And I know I'm sure, or again, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like some cities still adopt that. I know recently in Houston, they've kind of transitioned to kind of make it like a lottery, because there's only so much like vouchers, Jane, that they can kind of give out, the Section 8. And I brought that up because they can apply to somewhere like us. So certain apartments accept, Section 8 vouchers, certain apartments don't. And that's where there's so many different parts to it. Because we recognize the importance of the population that uses Section 8 vouchers. We also want to serve them. While if you kind of go to a high-rise, apartment, a little bougie, like they wouldn't accept something like that, even though they're guaranteed that someone's going to pay for them. So it's kind of a give or take. Some people don't want to take Section 8 vouchers because you have to get some license, and you have to go through some stipulations because you get government funding. The ones that don't accept it, of course, they have more leeway to enact the rules that they want to do. So it's kind of a give or take. So we also have to answer, because we accept Section 8 vouchers and we do accept government funding, we do have to also abide, but we are willing to go through that, of course, because, the mission of, ending homelessness and the different kinds of homelessness. And another type of voucher, and this is, more of me getting nerdy, would be, project-based vouchers. And that's what are awarded to our residents who come through programs. And they're project-based because they have to be part of like Starve Hope or Avenue 260 or all these different types of organizations that will take people off the streets, check their, score, or their, assess their situation, and then put them at New Hope Housing or in other places. And they are able to, of course, pay the funds and pay the rent through this type of voucher. And I'm sure there's other mechanisms too, but those are the two ones that we kind of deal with, or that I'm aware of. Yes, did that kind of answer your question, Jane?
Yeah, no, that was helpful. Interesting too. Not too nerdy. A good balance.
Nerdy is good.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
RG Maham asked a question in the chat. Have you guys seen more people or maybe more applicants due to COVID?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I guess I can speak from my experience. I'm sure Sarah will probably have more statistic for our entire property. Definitely, I think we've gotten more people. COVID. So let's talk about COVID in general. Of course, we've kind of just had to adjust, and that's for most people, of course. Certain programs, like we can't, we're unable to have people gathering and kind of go through the residential services side that we've always been accustomed to. And that's always been hard because that is part of our model and our approach. But of course, we have to take into account health concerns. For COVID directly affecting people's employment, I have seen that as well. I processed applications of people that are receiving unemployment benefits because they lost their job because of COVID. As a result, they've also been unable to pay their rent. So there's been many infrastructures in play to kind of give them leeway, to kind of help them kind of get back on their feet. So definitely COVID has impacted our residents and our general applicants, and would have an increase and have a different type of income, but also a new dimension of how we kind of address this issue. I'm sure Sarah might have also other things to say on that.
I think you hit it there. I think the important thing to know is that there's certainly a higher need now because of COVID. It's more critical than ever that we get folks out of overcrowded shelters, out from underneath the bridges. At the same time, you know, we've spoken a lot tonight about how dependent we are on the quote unquote system. And the system is government run and government funded. And so when the government sort of grinds to a halt, so do a lot of the, you know, the administrative duties that are taking place at HUD, the city of Houston support that we need, those sorts of things, all the little details that go into getting folks housed, the different players and lots of different organizations, when they're working from home or they're furloughed, or the funding is somewhere stuck, that has a tremendous impact on our ability to continue to house people. The other thing, of course, everybody's heard about the eviction moratorium. So both luckily and unluckily, it's a very complicated thing, and most things are complicated. Folks are able to stay in housing when they've lost their jobs and would normally be evicted, both from New Hope or other places. And so I think we've probably had a little bit less turnover in the sense we've had fewer people leave us. And so we've had fewer units, of course, open up to new people. So I think it's complicated. You know, I don't, number wise, I would think that we probably had fewer of the program people and more of the self-pay people come through our doors, but that's just sort of what I would imagine. We'll look at the data and we'll get back to you. We'll do some data analysis.
Yes, love it. Jane raised her hand, and maybe that will be our last question because I know we're coming up on 7 o'clock. I'm happy to leave the Zoom room open if people want to keep talking, but formally.
I was just wondering, like, what causes turnover in New Hope, and like, is that a good thing? Like, do you want people to leave and like go on to better things, or is it sometimes like not a good thing? Could you speak about that?
I'm going to say it's both, but this is a property management question. So I'm going to let RG and Deborah take their department answer.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Sarah and say that it's both, because sometimes they are moving out into like their own like non-affordable housing apartment where they can like kind of do whatever they want, have free reign. They no longer need the supportive services that we provide, and they have like become independent, they have a job, and they're like progressing forward. We do also see sometimes people just abandon their unit because they have been pretty like permanently hospitalized or like long-term hospitalization due to mental illness or chronic disability or like a major surgery or something. We do have a lot of residents that have various health issues, and a lot of our residents are elderly. Like I said, they're on disability, retirement, things like that. And sometimes we have residents who get arrested, and that's why they end up like forfeiting their apartments. So it's definitely both sides of the coin that we see.
And I guess also just to tie it back to our mission that we've stressed all throughout our presentation, we definitely have a lot of leeway. And I think that's something that I've noticed with COVID and with people leaving our property. There has been, because we recognize the importance of solving homelessness and different kinds of homelessness, we're not ready just to evict somebody or make them leave right off the bat. If you go to a conventional property, if you miss one day of payment, you can be gone the next day. If you live with the landlord and they could evict you for extra, and I feel like people are mostly, I've heard these stories before, or have heard these stories before, but with New Hope Housing, because we have that housing first mission and with our ultimate goal in mind, if someone misses 1 month of rent because of COVID, we can, refer them to resources to pay off the rent. We do sometimes have extra funding and kind of help these people pay off the rent. And there's so many structures in place to kind of prevent that from ever getting to the point. But of course, there's also the flip side of making them leave, Jane, and to kind of answer your question further, with our case management and our supportive services, they were able to find a housing within their budget, or, because they got a job, they're able to go through this. They've graduated, as they would say, from their program. And that's for the better, for them to leave us and have another room for people who might need it more, and to kind of go and move into big and better things.
Thank you.
Of course.
Well, thank you guys a lot for this, for presenting on this topic. It is interesting, and I thought very interesting the way you opened the presentation with talking about what Bonner does, the ways that we're trying to address the issue of poverty. And it struck me that the issue of housing kind of underlies them all. We consider the things that we work on to be fundamental issues faced by people experiencing poverty that need to be overcome. But before any of those can be overcome, housing has to be met. And so I appreciate and learned a lot from you all speaking tonight. It's always a joy to see you. And so thank you again. Students, if you guys have more questions or you think of something later, I would encourage you to reach out. I can post Sarah, Deborah, and RG's contact information, but also if you want to send something to me, I can forward it on.
And I'll stay here for a little bit. Sorry to interrupt. I'll stay here for a little bit if anybody needs to.
And if you're interested in this kind of...
Yeah.
What?
I said you guys can add us on Facebook, LinkedIn.
If you guys are interested in this kind of field, or even just learning more about it, maybe doing research someday, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to some very accessible alumni and amazing community partners to get information or resources on those kinds of things. Thank you all, and thank you everybody for coming, and have a great night.